Thank you so much, Bu Titi, for allowing me to share my presentation. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Prof. Henry Subiakto. It is a great pleasure for me to be here to share my talk on internet regulation in Singapore. So my name is Sulfikar Amir. Currently, I'm an associate professor in sociology program in the School of Social Sciences, Nanyang Technological University. So I'm a sociologist, not a law professor. So yeah, I won't touch so much about legal aspect of internet regulation in Singapore, but I will give you sort of a big picture of how the Singapore government manage the digital infrastructures and to make sure that the use of the internet will not cause harm to to the people. So let me share my slides. Okay, so this is Singapore. I'm sure some of you, if not every one of you, have been to Singapore. It is a very nice city. And it is a very advanced society in terms of the economy and the use of technology. And I've been living in Singapore for 10 years now. So I'm quite familiar with basically almost everything about Singapore. But my project itself is focused mostly on other countries. Although one of the ongoing projects that I'm currently working is on digitalization in Singapore. So we're looking at the impact of digitalization on the economy, on the society, on the culture, in order to be able to understand, the impact of digitalization, as well as how to manage the process so that it will benefit everyone. Now, for those of you who have not been in Singapore or who are not familiar with Singapore, I'm going to give you sort of a brief intro to the country. So this is Singapore. Let me, what is my, I'm trying to find the remote control. No. Yeah, so this is the islands of Singapore. It's actually an archipelago. It has 50 small islands around the big island here, as you can see. So the total landmass of Singapore, the total size of landmass of Singapore is 725 kilometers square. And one thing that you need to know that the original landmass of Singapore is actually 500 kilometers square. So there is more over 200 kilometers square that comes from reclamation. And of course, for many years, Singapore, carry out reclamation with sands from what else? Indonesia, of course. So Indonesia is a very strategic partner for Singapore. Now, to give you a sense how big is Singapore, I put the map of Singapore here next to Jakarta. Yes, okay. So you can see how big it is compared to Jakarta. It's much bigger than Surabaya, but as you can see here is nearly the same size of Jakarta. Now, talking about the population, in Singapore today, there is 5.6 million people living in the island. And this is the composition of the population. The Singapore citizens makes only 3.5 million, okay? So this is the real Singapore citizens, and then permanent residents makes about 500,000 people. And this is the combinations between permanent resident and Singapore citizen is what we call as residents, which counts to 4.04 million people. So it's very much smaller in terms of population compared to Jakarta. And there is 1.6 million who are considered to be non-resident. And this is the breakdown of the non-resident groups. And I actually belong to this group, 12% of employment pass holders. Now, in terms of ethnicity, now this is something that is very relevant to our discussions about internet regulation in Singapore. This is the composition of ethnic groups in Singapore. The Chinese is the majority, which makes 75.6% of the whole resident population. And then the Malay makes 13.6%, Indians 8.7%, and Eurasian and other groups 2.1%. So it is considered to be a multicultural society because it is a mix of different ethnic groups. Now, in terms of the economy, at the moment, last year, the total GDP of Singapore is 337 million US dollar. And the GNI per capita, or income per capita, is $59,590. Now, how big is this compared to Indonesia? This is the number. Okay, this is the total GDP of Indonesia: 1,119,190 US dollar. 190,000. Sorry. 119, yeah, 1,119 billion, billion, and 190 million US dollar. So you can compare it with this, then you can find that Singapore GDP is 1/3 of Indonesian GDP, and that makes and then compare Indonesia in terms of income per capita. This is the income per capita of Indonesia at the moment, $4,050. So you can see here that Singapore is much better in terms of income per capita and also GDP per capita. My point here is that Singapore is considered to be a developed economy, it's an advanced economy, and this is the composition of GDP, by sectors. So you can see here manufacturing makes 20%, wholesale and retail trade 17.3%, business services 14.8%, finance and insurance 13.9%, and you got information and communication sector here 4.3%. So you can see here that Singapore economy is quite diverse in terms of the reliability on all sectors. Although we know that the majority, the dominant sector is manufacturing and business and finance. Now, what is interesting to highlight here is that the business service and finance and insurance is going to be, or projected to be, much bigger than manufacturing within 10, 20 years. And that means what? It means that digital infrastructures must be improved significantly in order to support the operation of business, services, and finance and insurance. And that's my entry point to the internet regulation in Singapore. But before we go into the details of internet regulation, one thing you also need to know about the political system in Singapore. Now, Singapore is a democratic society. It's a democratic country. It is a republic, and since it became independent in 1965 all the way to now, it has been ruled by one single party, which is the PAP, People's Action Party, the party that was founded by Lee Kuan Yew, and today the Prime Minister of Singapore is Lee Hsien Loong, which is the son of Lee Kuan Yew. Is there a nepotism in here? Yeah, maybe, but Lee Hsien Loong is a very experienced politician, a very competent leader. He got a degree in engineering and government studies from Harvard and Oxford. So he is fully competent in terms of his ability to lead the country, and he's been considered successful in transforming the country for the past 20 years. But the bottom line here is that PAP is considered to be sort of a semi-authoritarian regime, because there are some regulation or some rules that restrict the freedom of Singapore's people in voicing their concern, in voicing their opinion, in challenging the government. And that's sort of the public image or the global image of Singapore that considers Singapore to be less democratic society compared to, for example, Indonesia or Thailand and etc. But actually, I will say that it's not so much less democratic, because there are some aspects of political system that allows people to participate and to give feedback, comments, and even critiques to the government. And this is what I'm going to talk about. Now, of course, when we look at how internet is regulated in Singapore, we need to know what exactly does Singapore have in terms of digital infrastructures, in terms of the internet network. Now, this statistic gives you a sense of how good is the digital infrastructure in Singapore. This is a survey done by a global company on what they call as NRI. NRI stands for Network Readiness Index. Okay, and for the past 10 years, Singapore has been ranked top 10. And this is from last year, no, from 2018, Singapore is ranked number 2 after Sweden. Okay, and I think, last year it was ranked number 3. But for the past 5 years, it has been, ranked number 1. It declined not because the digital infrastructure in Singapore decline as well, but it's basically because other countries develop much better. So digital infrastructures in Singapore is very advanced, is well integrated, and it's rapidly growing. And this is another statistic that show you the number of internet users in Singapore. So this is the number, the number of the user. By now, 2020, there's 4 million people who use internet in Singapore. And as you can see here, in terms of percentage, Singapore population, there's a 88.2% of Singapore population use internet. So the internet penetration is very deep and very extensive in Singapore. Almost everyone use internet. Probably only the older generation that do not use internet very frequently compared to younger generation. But the bottom line here is that internet is everywhere. Everything is connected to the internet. So it is a very massive network of infrastructures that the entire economy relies so much on the operation of this system. And this is just to give you a sense of how fast the internet system in Singapore. So this is from, I think this is from last year. Okay, that shows the broadband speed in Singapore. Okay, in terms of the policy, there is one government agency called Smart Nation Office, which organized this initiative called Smart Nation Singapore. And it is basically a series of projects that emphasize or that aim to improve digitalization process in Singapore. And these are some of the sectors that they aim to contribute to the digitalization process: the use of national digital identity, e-payments, Smart Nation Sensor Platform, smart urban mobility, and moments of life. And these are some of the projects that they are working on in improving the digitalization process. So you can see here, this is a bunch of technological development that relies on the expertise from local universities such as Nanyang Technological University. Now let's talk about internet censorship. Butiti, how much time I have left? Okay, so let's talk about internet censorship in Singapore. Now this is an issue that has been in heated debate among not only Singaporeans or local scholars, but also by global researchers, because they consider Singapore to be a role model in terms of economic development, but at the same time, Singapore shows some tendency to restrict the freedom of the people. Okay, well, of course, Singapore is not China. Okay, I mean, in China, almost everything is controlled by the government, but in Singapore, you still can enjoy some form of freedom, especially in the use of the internet. But there are some cases that show that the government is very strict when certain individuals, commit what they consider to be an offense to the government, to people, etc. So I'm going to show you one particular case that comes from this, that was done by, committed by this Singaporean kid. His name is Amos Ye. Now this kid is very smart, okay? And when he made this video on YouTube, I think he was in middle school, SMP, anak SMP, yeah? And his English is very good, his Chinese also excellent, probably because he was too smart that his parents decided to take him from school and do homeschooling, because no one really want to hang out with him, because it's he's very cynical, it's very critical, and etc. And he had been a YouTube phenomena for some time, until he made this video which sent him to jail. So let me play the video here, and you can see why he was arrested.
Lee Kuan Yew is dead, finally. Why hasn't anyone said, fuck yeah, the guy is dead? Lee Kuan Yew was a horrible person, because everyone is scared. Everyone is afraid that if they say something like that, they might get into trouble, which, give Lee Kuan Yew credit, that was primarily the impact of his legacy. But I'm not afraid. So if Lee Hsien Loong wishes to sue me, I will oblige to dance with him. Come at me, motherfucker. Lee Kuan Yew, contrary to popular belief, was a horrible person and an awful leader to our country. He was a dictator, but managed to fool most of the world to think he was democratic. And he did so by still granting us the opportunity to vote, to make it seem like we have freedom of choice. However, during your rule, you control the entire media and education, proliferating nationalistic propaganda on a daily basis. Like right now, since Lee Kuan Yew is dead, all day you see 24-hour news coverage of necrophiliacs sucking Lee Kuan Yew's dick. And you place an excessive surplus of your books in popular bookstores. In most of his books, look at how he self-indulgently plasters reams of pages with these montage of pictures of his experiences. Like, ooh, look how much better I am compared to you. And of course, he is absolutely notorious for suing people who criticized him, forcing them into...
Okay, I'm not going to play the entire video. You can actually search it on YouTube by this name, Amos Ye. But so you imagine during Suharto's regime, okay, maybe not Suharto, let's say, Suharto's son becomes the next president of Indonesia, and during this Suharto's son's leadership, there's a young kid who made a video offending Suharto when he passed away. So basically, that's what MSU did. Lee Kuan Yew is a very respectful and charismatic leader. Okay, he's the founding father of Singapore. Okay, just like Sukarno. Okay, and he considered to be a very successful leader that has transformed Singapore from a poor country into a rich country. So a lot of Singaporeans, the majority of Singapore people praise Lee Kuan Yew so much. And then suddenly this kid, MSG, made this video when Lee Kuan Yew passed away in 2015. Okay. Now, what is interesting here is that, well, not every Singaporeans agree with the government's decision to arrest the kid. Okay, there are some Singaporeans said that it's okay, just let him go. He's just a kid. He just he's still learning. But what is interesting to see that he was arrested not because of his offensive comments on Lee Kuan Yew. So Lee Kuan Yew's family did not sue this kid, okay, did not file a lawsuit on this kid, but he was arrested under a law that bans the deliberate intention of wounding the religious or racial feelings. If you continue this video, there are some comments that he made here that actually offended the Christian and the Muslim community. So it's not. So he was arrested not because his offensive comments on Lee Kuan Yew, although that's what many people think, but he was actually arrested because of his offensive comments on the Muslim and Christian community. Okay. Now he was, I think he was arrested only for a short time and was released because of his young age, and then he tried to. I think he migrated to the U.S. In 2016, but then I think he was arrested in Chicago for some case. I don't know what he's doing now, but he's in the United States now. Okay, so this is just one example of how internet censorship was done in Singapore. And so let me just give you a list of laws that regulates the internet use in Singapore. So this is a host of laws, existing laws in Singapore that has been used by the government to regulate the internet use. The first one is what they call Sedition Act. This is actually a legacy from the British colonial government. So I think it's similar to KUHP, right? Sedition Act means undang-undang anti penghasutan. So the Sedition Act used to charge internet users deemed to have promoted feelings of ill will and hostility between different races or classes. And this is exactly the law that is used by the government to arrest Amos Yee. Okay. And then in 1993, there's another law. Of course, in 1993, the internet was not widely used, but then the Singapore government back then already have problems with with computer misuse. So they passed this legislation, which basically hold internet users who are liable for causing public mischief. Okay, and then 2013 there's another law. Now this is something that caused sort of a protest that prompted protests among Singaporeans broadcasters, because now they have to now they are required to have license, to apply for license to open news sites that report regularly on the country. So for example, the tick.com somebody want to create a news website, then they have to get the license. I think Indonesia also have some similar law regarding on the Broadcasting Act. And there's also another law which specifically focus on preventing remote gambling, because gambling is a social problem in Singapore. especially the Chinese population, they love gambling. And it caused a lot of problems in family, in their economy, and etc. So this is a law that is for people to place bets on overseas gambling websites from Singapore. So it's not about how to do gambling locally, but if, for example, there is a gambling website in Las Vegas and you place bets, then it is illegal to do that. If you want to do that, you have to go to Indonesia or you have to go to Malaysia to place your bets from that country. Now, the most recent one, the most updated laws that has been legislated by Singapore Parliament is what they call Protection from Online Falsehoods and Manipulation Act, or POFMA. This was passed last year. Now, this law, okay, or POFMA, is actually a quick response of the Singapore government to the spread of fake news and hoax in society, especially after the Facebook scandal in 2017. You know, the Cambridge Analytica fiasco, breakout, and people know about what this company did to support the Donald Trump, and how much falsehood were spread by Facebook. So I still remember in 2017, Singapore government summoned the Facebook director in Singapore to come to the parliament and to give a hearing about what Facebook, has done in facilitating the spread of hoax and false and fake news. And the follow-up is the creation of this law on protection from online falsehood and manipulation act. Now, there's been a lot of criticisms and resistance against this act by academic scholars here in Singapore, because they are worried that the act will be used by the government to suppress academic freedom, because you can use one of the one of the parts in the law to suppress any criticism that is addressed toward the government. But so far there's been no cases that shows that is the case. I mean, that is the possibility. But so far, I think people are quite fine with with these laws. And how this law is implemented, there is a special government agency called POFMA office. Okay, so they have the law, but also they have the office. They have the agency under the Prime Minister's office, I believe, and the job of the office is basically to monitor any circulation of falsehood in Singapore and mitigate the situation. And this is the Ministry of Law and Home Affairs, who, when he is giving a presentations on the legislation of the law. So basically, the law comes from the law was initiated by the government and then approved by the Parliament in 2019. Now, so this is the question that we need to ask. Does internet freedom exist in Singapore? After looking at a series of laws in Singapore, well, my answer would be yes. There is internet freedom. I mean, basically there's no much. I mean, I've been living here for 10 years and have never encountered any problem in accessing any websites or any content, including, of course, the MSG contents on video about his offensive comments on Lee Kuan Yew. The Singapore government, never asked YouTube to remove the content. is still there, and I still can access it. And I think, in my opinion, there are more websites banned in Indonesia than in Singapore. One example is Vimeo. Vimeo is a video platform for creative workers and filmmakers to share their work so that everyone can appreciate that. It's similar to YouTube, but Vimeo is very specific for creative workers and filmmakers. Now, Vimeo I can access here freely, and I have a Vimeo account. But in Indonesia, it has been banned. It has been blocked since who's the minister? Pak siapa minister dari PKS itu?
Pak
Pak Tifatul, yes.
Tifatul Sembiring, sampai lupa. Tifatul Sembiring, yes.
Vimeo has been banned by since Pak Tifatul Sembiring was the minister, and I don't understand why. Because Vimeo is basically just, like YouTube, but then it has more creative content and it has a better quality in terms of the features. So maybe this is something that I can ask Prof. Henry to bring it up to the ministry to maybe to consider to lift the ban on Vimeo in Indonesia, because I know there's a lot of creative workers and filmmakers in Indonesia who use Vimeo, and they've been complaining about how to access the Vimeo. But yeah, go back to the question about internet freedom in Singapore. Yes, internet freedom exists in Singapore, but of course there are limits. Although up to now, I haven't encountered these limits. I mean, I've been enjoying internet freedom in Singapore so far. Now, I think that's because one realization by Singapore government that this, regardless of how the government rules the country, no one can actually have a full control of the internet. The internet is a technological system that is based on network, and it is very difficult to fully control the entire network by one single entity, by one single institution. And Singapore government realized this, that it is almost impossible to completely control the internet. Even China, that seemed to be a very powerful control over the internet, cannot really prevent any information that they don't like coming from overseas, because there's always a back door for information, images, video to circulate in the country without using the legal connections. Okay, so I think Singapore realized this, and that's why Singapore does not go with China's direction in terms of controlling the internet. But then they realize, they understand that when we talk about the spread of fake news and hoax, internet is a powerful tool to do that. Okay, so this is the, if we look at this too, this is the technological domain where digital networks such as internet facilitate and allows the spread of hoax in society. And the impact of the hoax and fake news the impact of the spread of hoax and fake news is profound on the level of government trust and social divide. So this is sort of the framework of looking at how the government in Singapore regulates the internet. They understand that the spread of hoax and fake news depends on the level of government trust and the degree of social divide in society. If the level of government trust is very low and people are deeply divided, then this will, reinforce the use of internet to spread even more hoax and fake news. So the bottom line here is that, from a sociological point of view, hoax will spread more and faster in divided society. So there's some fundamental issue here. There's one fundamental issue here, which is the society. And society is a sort of a venue where this hoax, will spread. But if society is coherent and unified and less divided, then the spread of hoax will be much less. And we can compare this. We can prove this argument by looking at some countries that has less divided society, but and in this society they have less spread of hoaxes and fake news. One example is New Zealand. Okay, New Zealand is a country that is relatively much coherent and more unified, and they don't have any problem with fake news and hoaxes. Another country will be Finland. Okay, a northern European country that enjoys so much, wealth and prosperity, and the people tend to be very coherent and very unified, and they also have no problem with the spread of hoax and fake news. So the bottom line here is that if you have a divided society, the production of hoax will increase and it will spread across the society. And this is what Singapore, take a look at in order to regulate, the internet. So when we talk about social divide in Singapore, it does exist. I mean, there is a divisions between social group in Singapore, but it's not so much between race or religions. Okay, race and religions are two highly sensitive issues in Singapore, and that's why the British colonial government created this Sedition Act to avoid clash between the Malay and the Chinese and the Indian, or the Muslim and the Christian, and etc. Today's Singapore, the social divide is not about race and religions, but it's more about class. Is a divide between the middle class, the upper class, and the lower class. And there's a study showing how social divide is growing between those who live in private housing in condominium and those who live in public housing. And between those who go to elite school, because there are some private elite school in Singapore, and those go to public school. And this is the social divide that Singapore is now trying to tackle by giving more sort of benefits to the lower income families in order to be able to catch up with with the middle class and the upper class. So they try to fill this gap in order to make Singapore a less divided society. And at the same time, the government has been maintaining a high level of trust within the public, within the local public, the local community. And this is a survey showing the level of trust in institution in Singapore. So there are 4 institutions that was surveyed: government, NGOs, business, and media. And this is the score of the government of this institution. So if we look at these 2 axes, one is the competence, the other one is ethical. All of 4 institutions in Singapore are considered to be competent and ethical. Ethical means less corrupt. Competent means they have the ability to carry out their jobs. And compared to the global survey, you can see here business is below ethical lines. NGOs is below the competent line. Governments is less competent and unethical. Okay, so Singapore, fare much better compared to other governments around the world. So to conclude my presentations, so basically in Singapore, the internet is seen to be a very important, a very pivotal instrument for economic growth and social cohesion. So they see internet as a technology that should not be, highly regulated in terms of the use of it, because it has a fundamental role. It plays a fundamental role for economic growth and social cohesion. And that leads to the pragmatic internet policy in Singapore. Pragmatic means that they won't use it for political purposes if it is not really threatening. They they provide the best internet connection in the world, and they continue to improve the digital infrastructures in order to support the economic growth. So basically, that's the pragmatic orientation of the internet policy in Singapore. And the outcome or the output of this pragmatic internet policy is indicated in three aspects. One is to give a very broad access to everyone to enjoy the internet. The old people, the young generation, the millennial, women, bands, kids, school students, and etc. They give broad access. At the same time, they also maintain a strict but fair laws. As I already mentioned, there's a set of laws, but then they use these laws very carefully. Okay, so there's a very strict, procedures in order for the government as well as non-government entities to use the laws in suing any groups or any individuals. But the most important thing here is that the government has been maintained a high level of transparency. And this is what this probably considered to be the antidote of hoax and fake news. If the government is transparent, if the government is open, and the people can judge whether one fake news is really true, if the government is transparent, if the government is open, the society, the people will be able to filter fake news from real news. And that's the end of my talk.